Well, I think the report was significant for several reasons. First, the breadth of it. I mean, it really looked at the size and the scope and the development of the Chinese economy from a macro perspective. And it then projected that growth over time on the basis of certain types of assumptions and calculations over a very long time period. And it tried to address some of the most fundamental criticisms, if you will, or obstacles or problems that could undermine or influence Chinese economic growth long term in a very systematic way. And then it talked about what China might do with this kind of long-term economic growth. And it projected growth as surpassing that of the United States around the middle of the century. In fact, a little sooner than that, by 2035, and then doubling the size of GDP within a short period of time thereafter, by the middle of the century. And along with that, there was a projection of accumulated military stock, not just defense spending levels, but the actual stock, which is a closer basis for, or better basis for evaluating capability over time. And there, it projected a level of stock that would be significantly greater than that of the United States at a somewhat later period of time, because there'd be a lag effect between GDP increase and the accumulated stock. Now, all of this, of course, is very significant when you look at long-term strategic issues regarding China and regarding the United States and China. On the one hand, of course, it could feed those concerns of individuals who say, oh, look at China, it's really coming, it's a big juggernaut, it's going to surpass the United States, it's going to be the next dominant power, the threat will grow. Now, Bert does not, in this policy brief, make that kind of an argument. He's basically saying that, yes, China is going to become very big, yes, it will likely surpass that of the United States, but we have a lot of time, relatively speaking, particularly when you look at the military stock issue, to assess what this means. And the United States needs to think more about its own growth rates and its own relationship to China and how to deal with this kind of increasing capabilities. Because the other side of the equation in all this is intention, is motive, is perception. Capabilities alone don't lead to action, don't lead to certain specific policies in the future. All of that is highly contingent. So Bert's piece really opens the door to a discussion about that, with a certain argument about China being a continuing very large power. I think the next administration could, first thing they have to do is, of course, look at this report as one assessment and evaluate very clearly the bases for Bert's arguments. Now, the panel today raised a lot of questions that relate very much to Bert's projections. The sustainability of China's growth, the level of gap between China and the United States, and at what time it might emerge. All of these were to some degree challenged by members of the panel from different perspectives. So the first thing that the next administration would do would be to look at this as one assessment and examine very carefully the bases for the kind of assessment that Bert makes here. Because, as I say, there's not uniform agreement on this, but it certainly is one credible argument to a great extent. So that has to be taken into consideration. The next thing, of course, is in looking at the rate of China's success and the rate of its development over time. To what degree does that put pressure on the incoming administration to actually think more long-term about how to deal with a rising China? That it's more likely than not that China is going to continue to develop at quite high rates of growth. The level may not be quite what Bert says, the amount of gap may not be quite what he says, but most people believe, and the panel here did corroborate Bert's view, that China is likely to continue to grow at pretty high rates of growth. So the doomsday scenario of an internal collapse, falling apart, prolonged ossification leading to all kinds of internal problems for China is less likely in the view of this argument and the panel commentary. So that's one very important thing the next administration, I think, has to take into consideration.